Welcome back to Season 6 of the Group Practice Accelerator Podcast, brought to you by Polaris Healthcare Partners, where we leverage decades of healthcare and business experience to drive growth in successful group practices just like yours. If you're a healthcare entrepreneur and you're interested in building, scaling, or exiting your group practice, you've found not only the industry's leading resource for business education, but a team of trusted advisors dedicated to helping you achieve and exceed your goals. In short, the team at Polaris creates clarity, confidence, and results. I'm your host, Jamie Falasz, and the Group Practice Accelerator Podcast is on the air. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me again this week because today we're going to be discussing accountability and what you can personally do as an owner-operator, a leader in your organization, to turn that accountability into dollars. Now, we all want our businesses to be valued highly and as highly as they possibly can be. And we thought that it was important to talk about this right now because we know more than a few of you are planning to go to market this year or you're getting streamlined to do just that. And accountability plays a really big role here. And you might ask, Amy, how is that? What do you mean? What I mean is this. You can't be all things to every aspect of your business, and you need people, partners that you can trust to move the business forward, whether you are practicing 4 days or 2 days or 1 day a week. And if you don't hold people accountable, including yourself, you won't be able to achieve the value that you're looking for. And we're going to explain more about the why, so stay with me. And when I say we, I mean, I've got Adin Bradley here with me behind the mic today, and he's going to help us understand the role of accountability in value and what you need to do today to ensure both you and your team are accountable every day. Adin, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Jamie. It's been a minute. So happy New Year to you and everybody. Glad to be
Oh my
back.
gosh, it's February. We're still saying it.
I know. I know.
It's okay. Happy New Year to you. And gosh, we have been all over the place with shows and speaking everywhere. So I'm glad we got this time together.
Yeah, same.
All right. So we're going to talk about accountability today. You sent me some things that you wanted to talk about, and in kind of mulling this over in my brain, I know that it's hard for owner operators to give up a little bit of control. So why don't we start with that before we even get into the accountability piece?
I think this is the perfect timing for you and I to chat because I just returned from a conference last week in San Antonio and had an opportunity to meet with a lot of operators
Mhm.
as well as owners. And a lot of the conversations have a lot of common threads. And they are very much similar to most of the groups that we work with. And while they all think that their issues are unique, they could not be any more common than they are. So I'm looking forward to this conversation because it's extremely relevant to some of the groups that we just started working with. And also several of the groups that I've begun having conversations with that are trying to determine how Polaris can help them finally move forward. And one of the things you mentioned was control. And I heard this phrase and I said we have to use it, is that control feels safe until it becomes the reason nothing changes. And that
Exactly.
so when people, I'm going to kind of repeat that again. So control feels safe until it becomes the reason nothing changes. That is the one thing that I feel is holding back a lot of groups, is a feeling of loss of control. So quarter after quarter, year after year, they look back and nothing has materially changed. So today you and I are going to talk about some things on how to get over ourselves as leaders and owners and entrust our team to deliver results with some transparency and also making sure that we have the right people in the right seats to deliver that.
Well, and I'm glad that you repeated that for everyone because it is really valuable to hear. And I think for anyone who is running a business, I think that you shoulder a lot of responsibility and you do feel responsible for the people on your team, for the practices that you've created with the support of your teams. But you can't do that all yourself. It can't be solely your responsibility because if you try to do that as you scale, the wheels are going to fall off the bus. So we need to translate that responsibility into accountability and distribute some of that among people that you trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And in speaking to a couple potential new partners coming with us that I spoke with this week, both have multiple sites in different areas of the country. Similar in the fact that they're PPO offices, and both had an inflection point at about 4 or 5 offices where the wheels started to come off. And
Mhm.
they found that margin was going down, profitability was going down, while revenue may remain stagnant or even marginally improved because you're adding offices. The cost of that became more than the value of adding those practices. And now they're really starting to understand what scale and centralization is. And they're also starting to find that they are getting exponentially more thinly spread. So
Absolutely.
it's going to get materially worse. It's never going to get better in that situation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I know that was a great takeaway from our masterclass that we had in Charlotte. A lot of our attendees took a lot from that, that they could go back Monday morning and start implementing some of these things and really reflect on how they can impact their own business. And then other things where they're obviously going to need your support. But let's talk about how that lack of accountability impacts the numbers. And maybe even some words on transparency. I think you know where I'm going with that.
Yeah, 100%. So, first and foremost, let's just start with having a team that we trust. And I
Mhm.
don't mean just trust. I mean someone that a team that is steeped with experience, some growth expansion in their own skill set and their ability to lead others. And I'll say that it is impossible to hold our team accountable when they don't know the numbers and they've never either seen them or they don't understand them. um, we avoid conflict at times, and then we expect them to perform and lead, but they really don't know where they're leading from. They don't have a jumping off point, they don't have a measuring stick, and they can't look at what it is that they're supposed to be measuring.
So where do you recommend that jumping off point be? Let's break that down a little bit because I want to get into the other aspect of accountability. But where should people start in terms of transparency around the numbers and that jumping off point?
Yeah, so for me, what I have found lately is we run sort of two parallel tracks. First and foremost is having the owner define what their vision is.
Mhm.
And even if they're not fully committed to an end game, for example, are you looking to monetize in the next 3 to 5 years? We build from that backwards. If they want to keep growing to see how efficient they can get and then make a determination, that's fine. However, as long as we're making decisions from that vision back to now, is how we'll be successful. First and foremost, our data and analytics team is pulling all the financial reports, all the operational reports. I know I've said this countless times. That is your jumping off point of where the company is today. So we are measuring efficiencies, new patients, chair utilization, AR, every department you can think of, including clinical work, which is the type of dentistry that we're actually doing. The second part of that at the same time is working with the leadership teams to see if they really understand what their role is. How do they define their job? How do they understand their role? And if I ask the owner or the principals, what does Jamie do? Is their answer the same as Jamie's? If it's not, there's an issue. And I'll give you a particular example. I was with a gentleman last week that owns 7 practices in the Midwest. And we were talking, and his head was spinning when we were done. And I asked what his director did, and, he sort of couldn't define it. And I said, "I often ask directors or VPs or COOs, define your job to me." And I've made this comment before. If they say, "I put out fires,"
Uh,
I immediately say, "Okay, you are the agent of chaos in that building, and the business is running you, and you're not running the business." Well, lo and behold, Jamie, this gentleman's director of operations stops by,
oh,
and I meet him, and I introduce myself, and I said, "Oh, I heard you're the director of operations. How are things?" And sort of looked at me like, kind of side eyed, and I said, "What do you do?" What do you think his answer was?
a huge red flag. I can see this coming a mile away.
What did he say, Jamie?
Said he's putting out fires, didn't he?
The owner's head spun around almost like a dandelion was gonna pop off. And, so it brought a little bit of validity to the conversation that we had already had. And the reason that that happened was it was organic because I did not know he was gonna show up.
Yeah.
None of the conversation was premeditated. It was just a very casual conversation. So I think it got him to really thinking about looking, we referred to the term as warts before, sort of like looking in the mirror. So while we are there to really help facilitate change, in the beginning, it seems like we're crushing hopes and dreams because we are bringing things into alignment for owners and principals to
Yeah.
really say, this is who I am. You may think you're something different, but the data will show you who you are.
Yeah, that's true. But in all seriousness, what a great opportunity to learn something about your business. Nobody wants to hear that they have an ugly baby, but on occasion, we need to hear that, because things have to get fixed.
Yeah, I'll tell you, we are never short on analogies on this podcast, and I do hope our listeners get a chuckle every now and again because
So,
even as many as we've done, you still always kind of bring a laugh to me. But you're right. I mean, one of the things that we experience is that the owners are really trying to sometimes save people's feelings. They're afraid to have difficult conversations because it's an easier route. And even when we get more involved and more purposeful with the team members in what they do, I find very quickly that those that really crave that development are all in with us.
mhm.
And I work with most of our groups. The leadership team has been very, very responsive and positive to our presence
Yep.
because we're not there to prove somebody wrong or make someone feel smaller than they are. We're there to help develop them and give them the tools to begin leading. And there are some instances where the person really is so far in that they themselves are sort of looking for something internally that matches their skill set. So sometimes it may be bringing someone in above them, right? And that can help develop the team. Sometimes it is helping develop them. And in some cases in the past, it's actually had to go outside to bring someone in. We see a lot of impact when ownership and the team is aligned in utilizing the value that Polaris brings in our respective skill sets from being operators in the corporate world.
Mhm.
So I think for me, having them have the tough conversations on why we're there and that a change has to happen because the continual spinning wheel, the hamster wheel is not changing anything. So for me, this is why I really feel this podcast is going to be impactful is if our listeners are hearing what we're talking about and saying, that's me, we need to talk.
Yeah, we definitely do because nobody likes to hear, like I said, that their business needs to be improved. But I think deep down, when it needs to happen. And I think there's always just a little bit of takes time for people to realize that, maybe not as quickly as what happened in that moment for that doc and as a director of operations, but people get there through conversations and just, really taking a look and doing some self-reflection. And I'm glad you brought all that up because that accountability, providing transparency for people, giving them a jumping off point, say, here's where we are today. Use that data as your truth. Use that data as your truth, set a benchmark, and hold people accountable. Now, there's another side of accountability that I want to talk about because I know this is difficult for a lot of owners, and it probably was for that gentleman standing in front of you that conflict avoidance. You brought this up a minute ago, and this is the rabbit hole that I want to go down because it is hard. Nobody wants to tell it like it is. I call it being direct. Some people call it being a jerk. But it really, you have to be real with people. And I want to hear your thoughts on your experience and some things like that with being accountable or being afraid to be accountable, rather.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned a couple words and I'll give a shout out to a book that I read a while ago called Radical Candor.
Mm-hmm.
And it helped me, when I came out of the corporate world to be even more, candid and transparent. And I think people respect that more. So, I don't think that we really put a dollar on the cost of avoidance. We don't really look at how much revenue or potentially even patient flow that we lose by not addressing underperformance in an office because one or two people can really impact the entire flow of an office, particularly if they're in a leadership role and they are the bottleneck, right? Those are your quintessential micromanagers. They are, I know everything. And a lot of times it is just really a byproduct of not understanding the position and really being afraid to ask. And even if you do ask, and sometimes the ownership doesn't really have the right answer, or if the owner understands that they have an underperformer, someone is just a little bit in over their head, they sort of go along to get along. And
Mhm.
it does impact everyone on the team. I mean, I've got groups that I'm working with now that we are making some changes that to them seem like too fast and radical. And I'm thinking, we're not moving fast enough. But
Uh,
when you go from sort of letting the day and the weeks and the months run you to actually turning the tide and running the day and really understanding what your daily metrics need to be, holding your team accountable, defining the why behind everything, and really getting to like root solutions to problems. I had an instance a few weeks ago where it was a small change that we made that had this exponential impact. And it was something as silly as so whenever I visit clients, I am always on the lookout for everything. This management by walking around and interacting is like one of my favorite methods. Like, don't tell me anything. I'm just gonna observe.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I observed was we had several patients leaving this beautiful office, like several $1 million a year in production office. And they weren't being greeted. We didn't have what I was feeling like a reappointment rate, just the simple things we do to close the loop on a really good patient experience. So I started asking some questions. And I said, how come patients are leaving without seeing the front desk? Oh, well, hygiene gave them an appointment and they left. They said, oh, wonderful. What's our reappointment rate? Well, we can't track that. Okay, so I'm actually getting to a point here, Jamie, because you're probably thinking, where's Aiden going with this? So I thought no patient should ever leave without that portion of the patient experience. And then what I found out that the reason that the front desk was so busy was that they were fielding phone calls from patients that had an appointment set, but were getting reminders to set an appointment. And they were calling to say, hey, and the reason was when the hygienists were doing the reappointment, we're not attaching a code. So it was triggering the need for an appointment. What is my point to this? One small meeting over 10 minutes to retrain the hygienist decreased the front desk's workload by about 75%. Now they can handle inbound calls, get people scheduled, get reappointed, reactivate patients, but more importantly, give somebody that sort of closing experience when they leave the office. Like, hey, Miss Jamie, it was great to see you again. We're going to see you on August 4th. And if something should come up, let us know. People leave there feeling really good. So just one minor change this whole throughput to the end. And we're already starting to see a change. Now, was there a little bit of resistance? By a couple, purely for the fact that they're not used to accountability. And now we had to address it. But where I want to give credit is the leadership team stood up and said, thank you, thank you, thank you. I feel empowered to make some of these decisions. So when we go back to a conversation we had several months ago about train wrecks and silver bullets, this
Mhm.
was exactly something that is akin to not being a silver bullet. It's just continually asking why until you drill down to the root cause. And just to sort of put a bow on this, what the leadership team is starting to really do in front of me that I love is I can see their decision-making ability come from a fact-finding basis in a really objective place where they've done all of the pressure testing. And then when they come with a solution, I'm like, this is amazing. And you can see not only the pride in themselves, but it feeds them to want to find even more issues to solve.
I love this. And I love when you share stories like that because you've probably got a few dozen listeners at least that are, all right, that was super conservative, but they're going through the same thing.
Yeah.
And these kind of stories kind of give them permission to shorten the reins a bit and go back to those SOPs that we talk about all the time and that you present on at various
Mhm.
conferences too, but to really hammer down the KPIs, live and breathe the data, and make sure it's all working. And at the end of the day, it's that patient experience. Like if that's not being catered to, what else do you have?
Yeah, exactly. And when we look at daily KPIs, and I get, probably 100 texts an evening, and I'm not exaggerating. Within about 2 to 3 weeks of doing this, I respond to these with a couple questions. One, because I'm trying to understand what the baseline is.
Mhm.
I'm trying to understand what the normal is now. And I'm also looking at some key areas that I can tell there's a process issue. And within a few weeks, once once the team starts to have confidence in their role and they're less intimidated by an outside resource coming in, they start to send narratives with the text. It was a great day because this happened in a bad way because.
Uh,
And to me, it's so refreshing. I'm like, hallelujah. You are now running your practice and they feel empowered. And now they realize that someone is watching and they're acknowledging. So it gives them this confidence that they're not just sending this information into the ethos and nobody's paying attention to it. And now, is it all rosy? No. There are people that want to push back. They're like, you know what? This accountability stuff isn't for me. I just like coming in and quote unquote putting out fires and going home. And those folks generally will determine on their own or otherwise whether they want to be on the bus or not.
yeah, and if they don't, better that you know now,
Correct.
right?
And I mentioned in the beginning, it impacts revenue, it impacts EBITDA, it impacts value because
Yeah.
turnover is expensive, training is expensive, churning patients is expensive. So the more sticky that your leadership team is, they are more committed to the patient. And therefore, the patient feels like they have found a home with us. And there's been studies shown, and I ask this question to owners all the time. Should your focus be on the team or the patient? And almost to a person, they always say the patient. And I said, data has shown that when you really focus on the team and empower them and they're happy and motivated and they're experts, that will transcend into the patient experience because they feel ownership and the patient experience actually is amplified in a
Mhm.
greater sense because of that. And it's really awesome to see in practice. And then we in our analytics start to measure this over, quarterly and 6-month intervals to say, okay, we've done all the blocking and tackling. We've got the right people in the right seats. We're taking care of our daily KPIs. Has it moved the needle? Right?
Yep.
That's a real testament to what we're doing.
Yeah, the transparency on the back end of the change, right? How did it turn out? Let's evaluate it. Let's look at it. You kind of beat me to the punch there. I was going to ask you about that cost of the lack of accountability. And when you and I were talking about developing this episode, you used a word enablement. No bueno. We don't want people that are just enabling that kind of behavior.
Yeah.
You know, and going back to ownership, this is your business. This is your livelihood. Why would you allow someone to just run through that in their own way that doesn't benefit the business or the team, whether culturally or financially? But I want to stick on the revenue side, the financial side, because how much revenue is lost by not addressing that underperformance? You see this. Give us a little brief snippet of that.
Yeah, I mean, we look at obviously we look at revenue quarter over quarter and on a trailing 12 months, but we also look at churn, we look at turnover, we look at margin, we look at supply spends. So if we are incorporating all of our best practices, you will see improvement on that. And what I have found is that some owners that are afraid of that confrontation, or for lack of a better word, or the ability to tell somebody you might be in a little bit over your head. Not only does it drain resources because you're paying them really not to be efficient or competent, you would be amazed that the team around them that is really hungering for ownership, and I don't mean ownership from being the owner, I'm talking about leadership, they become less efficient. So there is, if we can attract docs or hygienists, and those docs can't do more expansive dentistry, or we can't sell treatment because our treatment coordinators are not comfortable with that. Revenue is going to slide. And we look at that in the ADA codes. If you show me an office that's heavy on diagnostics, I'm going to show you an office that's not running very well, that their chair utilization is not really good. If we're referring a lot of patients out because we just feel like, yeah, we don't want to do the work here, it becomes when you solve for one person because you don't want to be transparent with them about some blind spots, you automatically impact several people around them that are dependent on their leadership. So, it can feel uncomfortable, but you know, having your top people not held to certain standards that you're asking them to be held to is sort of a dichotomy in what they're hearing. It's hard, and I know that, the specific question, every practice is gonna be different. But I will say that the more practices that you add on, it will be materially more difficult, Jamie, to have them doing the same amount of revenue in that ramp up as your flagship office because nothing is the same, right? If you've seen one office, you've seen one office. So office 3 and 4 doesn't have the owner there all the time. It doesn't have the same core group. So if you have been unable to sort of clone the archetype of what you're looking for and then hold them to a specific standard and invest in marketing and people and patient flow, you're simply going to have one or two offices dragging all the rest behind you. That's why you're less profitable. You'd be better off being a 2 or 3 office group than 6 or 7 if you're not really committed to the centralization and standardization of core functions with a competent leadership team.
Yeah, fair point. If you're not comfortable being, I'm going to say direct, like I said, some people see it as being the bad guy. You can't be worried about saving someone's feelings. And being direct can be done very diplomatically, right? I think we can agree on that. But when you're not direct, when you don't structure things appropriately and give people guardrails and guidelines, it leads to underperformance. Underperformance affects your dollars, or
Yeah.
you need to give that up to be the nice guy. So,
Yeah, and in a lot perfectly said, in a lot of these meetings, I've used this saying before, and I'm going to say it again because it holds true, and I share it with every client. What goes unsaid becomes the issue. And what we try to suss out of these conversations is getting the quote unquote unsaid out into the open so we know where to start. If you don't have confidence in the owner, I want to hear it. If the owner doesn't have confidence in the leadership team, I want to hear it. If the team doesn't have confidence in their particular leaders, we need to hear this because we cannot fix what is not brought to light.
exactly. All right, I have time for one more question. And I want to ask you, how would I, as an owner, tell a long tenured employee that they're no longer a fit, maybe not just in their role, but in the company, maybe those separately?
Mhm.
That's a really uncomfortable conversation as a leader, and you've got to hold people accountable. You have to.
Yeah, it's a great question. And running through my mind are dozens and dozens of scenarios, and they're all somewhat unique. I feel like obviously being as truthful and respectful as possible. And even if it means the owner falling on their own sword, admitting that we have failed them in not providing the type of direction that we needed. However, in assessing their scope of macro management and development, we have just determined that the business, in order to move forward, needs to go in a different direction. I would focus on the positives that they brought to the team, and they're going to ask, what did I do? In the most objective, professional manner, I think it's okay to talk about their blind spots because as they go into the work world looking for a new position, they will have a better understanding, hopefully, of what to work on. Because if something was a weakness, they'll turn that into a strength. And they'll also know how to articulate what they're good at and what they're not good at as they start to interview. And as much as we don't want to see somebody out of a job, there are times when it needs to be done in order to move the business forward. And
Sure.
I also think simultaneously, and I have these conversations, the owner needs to understand that if they were part of the failure of that leader, what do they now have to change in their style to make sure that the next person is not set up for failure? Because now you have changed the paradigm completely to you can just keep inserting new people, but if you keep leading or not creating a clear vision and expectation and autonomy to do that role, then maybe that role isn't the issue. It's you. So
Yes.
somewhere in there is a problem, and it's probably a combination, but I would just say, if anyone saw the movie Jerry Maguire
Mhm.
where he broke up with his girlfriend in the beginning, and she said, "We agreed on one thing, brutal truth." And he goes, "You use the word brutal." But I do think that, that sort of brutal truth is needed. It doesn't have to be aggressive. It doesn't have to be demeaning, and it should always be 100% objective with an example. Do not start veering into personal attacks, and don't allow. So for the owners out here, if you have to do this, please do not allow anybody to start reframing the conversation into an area that they want to go to. You're going in there with a specific objective. You're not going in there to get talked out of what happened. And as soon as it starts going off the rails, you respectfully end the conversation and move forward.
Excellent. Well said. Well, Adin, thanks so much for the chat today. Always a pleasure.
Great to be back. I'm looking forward to 2026.
Good, good. And it's all about accountability, right?
It's all about accountability, leadership, and macro management.
100%. Well, to our audience, we really appreciate that you support us by subscribing to the podcast. And we love the questions that you all send us. So keep them coming, and we'll keep delivering the content that you ask for. As always, if you want to learn about any of our Polaris expert advisory services, or maybe there's a topic we haven't covered that you want to hear about, you can send us an email to info@polarishealthcarepartners.com, or you can reach us by visiting our website at polarishealthcarepartners.com. Thanks so much for being a loyal listener and subscriber. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a colleague, and be sure to leave us a rating on any of your favorite podcast platforms. We'll see you on the next episode of the Group Practice Accelerator Podcast.